No doctor could save the billionaire's dying mother. The world's best minds failed, until a maid's 14-year-old daughter walked in and healed her within minutes. They called it the most advanced hospital in America, the place where money could buy miracles. But one woman was dying, and no one knew why. 20 doctors, a billion-dollar facility, every test known to science, all failing. Until a maid's daughter, 14 years old, sitting in a hallway with an old, leather-bound book, saw what no one else could. She didn't wear a badge. She didn't hold a degree. But in that moment, she carried the truth that could save a life or destroy her mother's. Because sometimes, the cure doesn't come from genius. It comes from courage. This isn't just a story about a dying woman in a luxury hospital. It's the story of how the invisible saw everything. And before I forget, where are you watching from today? Leave a comment below. Enjoy the story. The most expensive hospital in the country was failing. One woman was dying from a mystery no doctor could solve. The only person who saw the truth was not on the medical staff. Sunlight streamed through windows taller than a man. It did not warm the hallway. The light only seemed to make the Italian marble floors colder, the silence heavier. This was the Summit Wing at Cedar Crest. It was not truly a hospital. It was a five-star hotel for the very sick and the very wealthy. Here, visiting hours did not exist. Chefs prepared anything a patient desired. The air was filtered, smelling faintly of clean linen and money. Medical equipment was hidden behind polished mahogany panels. Privacy was the ultimate luxury. Susan Vance pushed her cleaning cart down the long hall. She was a woman of 42, with quick, quiet movements. She had worked here for 8 years. In that time, she had learned the geography of silence. She knew which doors to pass, which floors squeaked, and which families were grieving. Her uniform was crisp, pale gray. It was a color designed to blend in with the walls. Susan was good at her job because she was good at blending in. At the end of the hall, near a quiet alcove, sat her daughter. Emily Vance, 14 years old, looked up as her mother approached. Emily had pale blonde hair, pulled back in a simple ponytail. She sat on a cushioned bench, looking small for her age. She looked like any other teenager, perhaps bored, waiting for her mother's shift to end. In her lap was a book. It was not a school book or a novel. It was thick, old, and bound in dark green leather. The gold lettering on the spine was almost completely worn away. "How are you doing, sweetie?" Susan whispered. She stopped her cart and wiped her hands on her apron. "I'm okay, Mom. Just reading." Emily's voice was as soft as her mother's. "Mrs. Hayes in 801 she's not doing well," Susan said, her brow creased with worry. "The whole floor is tense." "They're worried," Emily said. It was not a question. Her son is Mr. Mark Hayes, the one who owns the shipping company. He's been here all week. He looks awful. Susan sighed and picked up a spray bottle. "I have to do her room. Dr. Monroe is having a meeting. They're trying to figure it out." "Okay, Mom. I'll wait here." Emily gave her a small, reassuring smile. Susan nodded and pushed her cart toward room 801. She paused. "Emily, please stay right here. Don't wander. Nurse Klein is on shift, and she's already particular." "I won't. I promise." Susan hurried away. Emily watched her go. She knew particular meant Nurse Klein hated seeing a 14-year-old girl in the most exclusive medical wing in the state. It was summer break. Susan's shift was 12 hours long. There was nowhere else for Emily to go. So she waited, and she watched. From her alcove, Emily could see the nurse's station. She could see the door to the conference room where the doctors met. And she could see the entrance to Suite 801. She had been watching for 4 days. She saw patterns that others missed. The door to the conference room opened. A group of men in white coats walked out. They looked tired and angry. Dr. Albert Monroe, a man of 58, was the leader. He was tall, with silver hair and a voice that never needed to be loud. He was the chief of diagnostics. He looked at the chart in his hand as if it had personally offended him. "It makes no sense, gentlemen," Dr. Monroe said. His voice echoed slightly. "We have run every panel. Her liver enzymes are erratic. Her kidney function is declining. And her heart, the arrhythmia is completely unpredictable." Dr. Ben Carter, at 30, was the youngest on the team. He shifted his feet. "Albert, her neurological symptoms are worsening, too. The confusion, the fatigue. It seems systemic. Could it be environmental? Something in her room?" Dr. Monroe gave him a cold look. "Doctor, This is the summit wing. The air is cleaner than a microchip factory. We tested her food. We tested the water. It is not environmental. But the decline is too fast for simple old age, Dr. Carter insisted. She is 81 years old, Dr. Monroe snapped. The body fails. We are missing the underlying disease. Go back to the labs. Rerun the autoimmune panel. Look for something rare. The doctors scattered, looking defeated. Emily watched them go. She had heard this conversation, or one like it, every day. The doctors were looking for one big, complicated answer. They were looking for a zebra in a field of horses. She looked down at her book. It was her grandfather's. Her grandfather was Captain Robert Mitchell. To the world, he was a decorated war veteran, a Green Beret, a legend in units that did not officially exist. To Emily, he was just Cap. Cap had been a medic in the deep jungles of Vietnam. He wasn't just a medic who set bones and stitched wounds. He was a field biologist. His life, and the lives of his men, depended on knowing the difference between a leaf that healed and a root that killed. He had taught Emily everything, not from textbooks, but from walks in the woods. The world is full of whispers, Em, he used to say, his voice rough. Most people are too busy shouting to hear them. But nature always tells the truth. You just have to learn its language. This book was his Bible, Mitchell's Guide to Field Botany and Toxinology. He had written it himself. It held drawings of plants, chemical breakdowns scribbled in the margins, and notes on antidotes. Emily's mother, Susan, entered suite 801 with her cart. The door clicked shut. A new person arrived at the elevators. He was a man in his late 50s, wearing an expensive suit that fit him perfectly. He carried a small, elegant briefcase and a designer gift bag. He smiled warmly at the head nurse, Nurse Klein. Gary, Nurse Klein said, her severe face softening. She's had a rough morning. Oh, poor Aunt Ellie, said the man, Gary Sinclair. His voice was smooth as butter. That's why I'm here. I brought her a little comfort. This was Gary, Eleanor Hayes's nephew. Emily had seen him before. He visited every afternoon. He always brought a gift. Mr. Hayes is with her now, the nurse said. Wonderful. I'll just pop in. Gary walked to the room. Emily watched him. There was something about his smile. It was too bright. It never quite reached his eyes. The door to 801 opened. Mark Hayes, the billionaire's son, came out. He was 55, but he looked 20 years older. His suit was rumpled. He hadn't slept. He ran a hand through his thinning hair. Gary, you're here. Mark, how is she? Gary put a comforting hand on his cousin's shoulder. Worse, Mark said, his voice thick. They don't know. They have no idea. They're the best in the world, and they're telling me my mother is just dying. And they don't know why. Now, Gary said. We must keep faith. I brought her that special tea she loves. The calming blend from Switzerland. It always helps her rest. I'll have the nurse make her a cup. Thank you, Gary. You're a good man. Gary smiled. She's my favorite aunt. It's the least I do. Gary went into the room. A moment later, Susan slipped out with her cart. She looked pale. She hurried past Emily, giving her a quick, strained look. Almost done, sweetie, she whispered, before rushing to the utility closet. Emily waited. 10 minutes later, Gary Sinclair came out of suite 801. He handed a beautiful, dark blue tin to Nurse Klein. Here is that chamomile blend she loves, Gary said. Please, make sure she has a hot cup. It's the only thing that settles her stomach. Of course, Mr. Sinclair. Nurse Klein took the tin. Gary patted her hand. You're a saint. He walked to the elevator, adjusted his tie, and was gone. Nurse Klein immediately went to the nutrition station to prepare the tea. Emily watched it all. Her grandfather's voice echoed in her head. Watch their hands, Em. People lie. Their hands don't. Emily had watched Gary's hands. When he thought no one was looking, as he waited for the elevator, he had wiped his palms on his trousers, like he was drying them. A smell wafted from the nutrition station. Chamomile. Sweet and grassy. But Emily's nose twitched. Underneath the chamomile, she caught another scent. Faint. Bitter. It smelled like burnt almonds. Emily opened her grandfather's book. She turned past the sections on mushrooms and snake venom. She went to the chapter on cardiac poisons. She found the page she was looking for. A detailed drawing of a beautiful flower with bell-shaped purple blossoms. Digitalis purpurea. Foxglove. Below the drawing, her grandfather had written a note in his precise, strong handwriting. Folk name, Dead Man's Bells. Poison is cumulative. Small doses over time build up. Mimics heart failure and old age. Symptoms: nausea, confusion, weakness, slow pulse. A classic sign: patient complains of yellow halos around lights. Easy to miss, hard to trace. Emily felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach. She had heard the nurses talking yesterday. They were swapping notes. One of them had said, "It's the strangest thing. Mrs. Hayes keeps complaining that the lights are too yellow." We checked her eyes. There's nothing wrong with them. Emily looked at the door to Suite 801. She looked at her mother, who was now quietly mopping the hall far away from her. She knew. This 14-year-old girl, sitting in a hospital hallway with a dead man's book, knew something that 20 specialists did not. Mrs. Hayes wasn't dying. She was being murdered. The world shrank to three things: the book in her lap, the click-click-click of Nurse Klein stirring the tea, the thumping of her own heart. Emily's hands were ice cold. She stared at the words cumulative poison. Small doses over time build up. The daily visits. The special tea. The stomach aches that the tea was meant to soothe. It wasn't soothing the sickness. It was the sickness. Gary Sinclair was giving his aunt comfort that was stopping her heart. Emily looked up. Nurse Klein was at the nutrition station. She poured boiling water from a silver kettle into a fine china cup. The steam rose in a column. She dropped an infuser, heavy with tea leaves from the blue tin, into the water. The clock on the wall read 3:15 p.m. In 2 minutes, that tea would be steeped. In 3 minutes, it would be at Eleanor Hayes's bedside. Emily felt a surge of panic, cold and sharp. She had to do something. She stood up. The heavy leather book slid from her lap and hit the marble floor with a loud thwack. Nurse Klein looked up instantly, her face a mask of annoyance. "Chill. This is a hospital, young lady, not a library." Emily's face burned. "Sorry. I dropped my book." "I can see that." Nurse Klein turned back to the tea. She tapped her foot, impatient. "You should be in the downstairs lobby, not up here. My mother is just finishing." Emily started, her voice barely a whisper. "I know where your mother is." Nurse Klein pulled the infuser out. She placed the cup and a small silver spoon on a serving tray. She should know better than to have a child lingering in the summit wing. The nurse's words were sharp. They were meant to hurt. Usually they did. They made Emily feel small and out of place, like a mouse in a lion's den. But right now, the sting of the words was nothing. All Emily could see was the cup. A classic sign. Patient complains of yellow halos around lights. Mrs. Hayes was seeing the poison. Nurse Klein picked up the tray. She balanced it perfectly. She began the short walk from the station to the door of Suite 801. Emily's grandfather's voice was in her ear again. Not the gentle teacher, but the captain. "There are times for thinking and times for moving. If you mix them up, you're dead." Emily moved. She stepped out of the alcove, directly into the nurse's path. "Excuse me, Nurse Klein?" Nurse Klein stopped, sighing with exasperation. "What is it?" "I am delivering medication." "That's not medication," Emily said. Her voice was shaking, but it was clear. Nurse Klein's eyes narrowed. "It is herbal tea, ordered by the patient's family to provide comfort. Now move aside. Please, don't give it to her." "That is enough." Nurse Klein tried to step around her. Emily stepped with her, blocking the way. "It's the tea. It's making her sick." A flicker of shock crossed the nurse's face, quickly replaced by rage. "How dare you? You are a maid's child. You know nothing. You are interfering with patient care. Get out of my way, or I will call security and have you and your mother thrown out." The threat landed. Emily saw her mother's face in her mind. The long hours, the tired feet, the fear she always had of losing this job, the best-paying job she'd ever had. Susan was coming back down the hall, pushing her mop bucket. She was still far away, but she could see them. She saw her daughter standing in front of the nurse. A look of pure terror crossed Susan's face. "Emily," Susan called out, her voice tight with panic. "Emily, leave the nurse alone. Get back here." But Emily held her ground. She looked at the cup. She looked at Nurse Klein's angry face. "It's poison," Emily said, louder this time. "It's foxglove." "That's it." Nurse Klein lunged forward, trying to push past. Emily didn't try to stop the nurse. She did the only thing she could. She reached out and knocked the tray. It was not a subtle move. It was a child's desperate, clumsy act. The tray tilted. The china cup, the spoon, the silver kettle, they all went flying. The tea, scalding hot and pale yellow, splashed across the floor. The cup shattered with a sharp crack. A splash of hot liquid hit Emily's hand. She cried out, a short, sharp gasp of pain. Silence. The hallway was suddenly, absolutely still. Nurse Klein stood frozen, her white uniform splattered with tea. Her face was pale, then flushed a deep, angry red. She was shaking with fury. You did that on purpose, she hissed. Susan ran up, dropping the handle of her mop bucket. It clattered loudly on the floor. Oh my goodness. Nurse Klein. I am so sorry. Emily. Susan grabbed her daughter's arm. What is wrong with you? Are you crazy? Susan was crying, frantic with fear. Ma'am, I will clean it up. I'll pay for the cup. Emily, apologize. Apologize right now. The door to Suite 801 opened. Mark Hayes stood in the doorway. His eyes were red-rimmed. He looked from the shattered cup to the furious nurse, to Susan, who was shaking her daughter. What is going on out here? His voice was gravel. My mother is trying to rest. Mr. Hayes. Nurse Klein's voice was high and tight. I am so sorry for the disturbance. This girl, she assaulted me. She threw the tea on the floor. On purpose. Just then, Dr. Ben Carter came out of the conference room, drawn by the noise. He saw the scene and hurried over. What happened? Is everyone all right? He was the first to notice Emily cradling her hand. You're burned, he said, gently reaching for her arm. She's fine, Nurse Klein snapped. She needs to be removed from this floor. Her mother should be fired for this. Susan flinched as if she had been struck. Please, sir. Mr. Hayes. Dr. Carter. She just tripped. She's just a girl. She's clumsy. We'll go. We'll go right now. Susan tried to pull Emily away, down the hall, toward the service elevator, towards safety. But Emily yanked her arm free. Her hand was stinging, a bright red patch growing on the skin. But her eyes were fixed on Mark Hayes. They were not the eyes of a clumsy child. They were old eyes. They were her grandfather's eyes. I'm sorry I spilled it, Emily said, her voice echoing in the quiet hall. But I'm not sorry it's gone. Everyone froze. Mark Hayes stared at her. His gaze was intense. He was a man who built an empire. He knew how to read people. He saw the defiance. He saw the certainty. Why? Mark asked. His voice was quiet. Why did you do that? Nurse Klein spoke first. Mr. Hayes, don't listen to her. She's delusional. She said the most awful thing. She said, let her speak, Mark said. Dr. Monroe, the chief of diagnostics, arrived. He took in the scene with a dark expression. Nurse? What is this? She's making wild accusations, doctor, Nurse Klein said. Mr. Hayes, Susan pleaded, tears streaming down her face. Please. She doesn't know what she's saying. We're leaving. Why? Mark asked Emily again, ignoring everyone else. Emily took a breath. She pointed at the spilled tea, which was already cooling on the marble. Because it's poison. The word hung in the sterile air. Dr. Monroe stepped forward. What did you say? She's insane, Nurse Klein said, crossing her arms. She's accusing Mr. Sinclair of poisoning his own aunt. She called it foxglove. Dr. Monroe scoffed. A small, sharp, ugly sound. Foxglove? Digitalis. He looked at Emily with open contempt. Child, Digitalis is a heart medication. We are not fools. We would have seen a Digitalis overdose on her charts. Her levels are normal. That's why you can't find it, Emily said, looking right at the chief doctor. She refused to be cowed. You're looking for the medicine. You're not looking for the plant. The medicine is just one part. The raw plant, the leaves, it has other things in it. Things that build up. Things that don't show up on a normal blood test. She looked at Dr. Carter. You said her symptoms were systemic. You said it was environmental. It is. It's in the tea. Dr. Carter stared at her, his mouth slightly open. This is the most ridiculous thing I have ever heard, Dr. Monroe said. He turned to Susan. Madam, your services are no longer required here. Take your daughter and leave the premises. Susan let out a small, strangled sob. It was done. Her life was over. She grabbed Emily's arm. Come on, Emily. We're going. Wait. The word was quiet, but it had the force of a command. Mark Hayes had not moved. He was looking at the dark blue tin Nurse Klein had left on the nutrition counter. He looked back at Emily. His face was a mask of grief and confusion. He was a man drowning, and she had just thrown him a rope. A crazy, unbelievable rope. But it was the only rope he had. How do you know this? Mark asked her. How do you know the word? Digitalis. Emily bent down. Her hand throbbed. She picked up the heavy, leather-bound book from where it had fallen. She held it up. My grandfather taught me, she said. He was a medic. He taught me to see what other people miss. Mark looked at the book. He looked at the spilled tea. He looked at the chief doctor who had given him no answers, and then at the girl who had given him one. Give me that tin, Mark said to Nurse Klein. Mr. Hayes? The tin. Now. Frightened, the nurse fetched the tea tin. And get me a sample bag, Mark said to Dr. Carter. We are going to test this tea. We are going to test everything. Dr. Monroe stepped forward. Mr. Hayes, this is highly irregular. We cannot make decisions based on the outburst of a child. Mark Hayes turned to the doctor. His eyes were cold steel. You told me this morning you had no new paths. You told me to prepare for the end. You told me you were missing something. He pointed at Emily. Maybe she just found it. The silence in the hallway was brittle. It felt like it could shatter again, just as the cup had. Dr. Monroe's face was a rigid mask of professional offense. Mr. Hayes, you are making a grave error in judgment. This is a hospital, not a stage for theatrics. It's my mother's life, Doctor, Mark said. His voice was dangerously low. And my judgment is the only one that matters in this wing. You told me you were out of ideas. Well, this is a new one. Dr. Carter. The younger doctor, Ben Carter, looked at his superior, then at Mark Hayes. He made his choice. He stepped forward. Sir, get a sterile collection kit. I want a sample of the liquid on the floor. I want the leaves from that infuser. And I want that entire tin. Mark pointed. Take it to the toxicology lab yourself. Tell them I want a full spectrum analysis. Not just what you expect to find. I want them to look for everything. Tell them to screen for raw plant alkaloids. Tell them to use liquid chromatography, mass spectrometry. Tell them to look for foxglove. Dr. Monroe actually recoiled. That is a complete waste of our lab's time and resources. The results you described, the normal digitalis levels, are from a mass spectrometry test. Then run it again. Mark's voice was not a shout, but it hit the walls like a hammer. Run it differently. Check it against a botanical sample. I don't care what it takes. Do it. Now. Dr. Carter nodded, his expression serious. Right away, Mr. Hayes. He hurried to the nurse's station, grabbing collection kits and evidence bags. He handled the spilled tea and the tin with a new, sudden reverence. He was no longer a doctor humoring a billionaire. He was an investigator on a new case. Mark Hayes turned his attention to the others. Nurse Klein was still standing rigid, her uniform stained. Nurse, Mark said. Sir, her voice was sharp. Get a mop. Clean this up. The nurse's eyes went wide. It was a maid's job. It was Susan's job. It was a pointed, brutal demotion. Mr. Hayes, I am the head nurse on this floor. And this mess is a hazard. Clean it up. Nurse Klein's face flushed a painful, blotchy red. She stared at him, her mouth opening and closing. She looked at Dr. Monroe for help, but the chief doctor had turned his back, furious, looking out the massive hallway window. Defeated, she turned and marched stiffly toward the utility closet, the closet Susan had been using. Finally, Mark looked at Susan and Emily. Susan was trembling, holding Emily's arm in a grip of iron. She was trying to make them both smaller, to disappear. Mr. Hayes, I am so sorry. We will go? I'll pack my things. You're not going anywhere, Mark said. Susan stopped breathing. Sir, you're not fired. Not yet. He looked down at Emily. The girl hadn't moved. She was still cradling her burned hand, but her eyes were steady. They were fixed on him. You. The girl. What's your name? Emily, sir. And your mother? Susan Vance. Ms. Vance, Mark said, his voice softening just a fraction. Your daughter has just made an extraordinary claim. A claim that accuses my cousin of the unthinkable. And a claim that accuses the best medical mind in the country of incompetence. He gestured to Dr. Monroe's rigid back. If she is wrong, Mark continued, his voice hardening again, she has caused a terrible disturbance. She has slandered a good man. And she has wasted my time. If she is wrong, you will, of course, be fired. I will have you escorted from the building. I will see to it that your reputation in this city is finished. Do you understand? Susan Vance made a small, terrified sound. She nodded, unable to speak. But, Mark said. He knelt. It was an awkward, unpracticed movement for a man in a $5,000 suit. He was now eye level with Emily. If you are right. If what you say is true. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. The air was thick with the implication. Your hand, he said, noticing the red, blistering skin. It's okay, Emily whispered. No, it's not. He looked up. Dr. Carter was back, holding a sealed evidence bag with the blue tin inside. Doctor, before you go to the lab, get this girl a first aid kit. Treat that burn. Then, take the sample. Of course, Mr. Hayes. Dr. Carter quickly retrieved a burn kit, applied a cooling gel, and wrapped Emily's hand in a sterile white bandage. His touch was gentle. He looked at Emily with a kind of wonder. Thank you, Emily said. Now, Mark said, standing up. He turned to Susan. You and your daughter will wait with me. Wait? Sir, where? Susan was bewildered. In the conference room. I want you where I can see you. He looked at Dr. Monroe. Doctor, are you joining us? Dr. Monroe turned from the window. His face was cold. I have actual patients to attend to, Mr. Hayes. I will be in my office. I trust Dr. Carter can read a lab report. This circus is beneath my dignity. Fine. Your dignity is your own concern. My mother is mine. Mark Hayes gestured to the glass-walled conference room. After you, Miss Vance. Susan, pale and trembling, walked on unsteady legs into the room. Emily followed. She paused in the doorway and looked back. Nurse Klein was mopping the floor, her movements stiff and angry. Dr. Carter was already halfway to the elevators, holding the evidence bag as if it were a bomb. Dr. Monroe was gone. The entire power structure of the summit wing had just been turned upside down. Emily took a breath and walked into the conference room. Mark Hayes followed and shut the door. The sound was a quiet, expensive click. The room was as luxurious as the rest of the wing. The table was a single piece of dark, polished wood, large enough to seat 20 people. Leather chairs surrounded it. One wall was glass, looking out over the hospital's private garden. Mark Hayes did not sit at the head of the table. He took a chair by the window. He gestured for Susan and Emily to sit, but not at the table. He pointed to two smaller, cushioned chairs in the corner. The message was clear. They were not his guests. They were on trial. Susan sat immediately, perching on the edge of the cushion. She looked like she might faint. Emily sat beside her. She placed her grandfather's book on her lap. The silence was the worst part. Minutes passed. 5, 10. Susan was twisting a loose thread on her gray uniform. Her lips were moving, but no sound was coming out. She was praying. Mark Hayes simply stared out the window. His phone buzzed on the table. He ignored it. It buzzed again. And again. Emily sat perfectly still. She focused on the rhythm of her breathing, just as her grandfather had taught her. In the jungle, waiting is the hardest part, Cap had told her. The enemy is the noise in your own head. Don't listen to it. Listen to the world. Wait for the signal. She was waiting for the signal. Finally, Mark Hayes spoke, his voice quiet, not looking at them. That book. Emily jumped slightly. Sir, the book on your lap. You said your grandfather gave it to you. Yes, sir. He wrote it. This made Mark turn his head. He looked at the worn leather volume. He wrote it? I assumed it was an old textbook. No, sir. He wrote it. It's his notes. From when he was in the war. He was a medic. But he was more. He was a botanist. He studied plants. Especially the ones that could hurt you. He had to keep his men safe. A war hero, Mark mused. He picked up his phone and finally looked at it. His brow furrowed. The lab will take time. At least an hour. Maybe more, to run the right tests. He put the phone down. He looked at Emily again, his gaze sharp and analytical. He was sizing her up, like a business opponent. Why did you do it, Emily? Really, don't give me the hero speech. Why did you knock that tray over? You heard what Nurse Klein said. You heard your mother. You knew she would be fired. You did it anyway. Susan drew in a sharp breath. Mr. Hayes, please, she's just a child. She is not just a child, Mark said, his voice cutting. A child would have cried. A child would have been scared of the nurse. She was not. She was scared of that cup. What? Emily looked at her mother, then at Mark. Because you were the only one who believed me, Emily said. Mark frowned. I didn't believe you. I was in the doorway. No, Emily said, shaking her head. Not then. Before. 4 days ago. When you first got here. You were arguing with Dr. Monroe. He said your mother was of an advanced age and that these things happen. And you got very quiet. And you told him, my mother was playing tennis last month. This is not age. This is something. Find it. Mark Hayes stared at her. He remembered the conversation. It had happened right by the elevators, in hushed, angry tones. You heard that? I hear everything, Emily said simply. I sit in the alcove. People, they don't see me. They talk like I'm a piece of furniture. And you heard the nurses? Mark guessed. Yes, talking about the yellow lights. My grandfather's book says that's a classic sign of foxglove poisoning. They thought it was just her eyes failing. And my cousin? Gary. Mark's voice was tight. You are accusing my family. He brings the tea, Emily said. Every day? And every day, about an hour after he leaves, she gets worse. I heard the nurses say that, too. They said his visits seemed to take a lot out of her. They thought it was emotional. A terrible, cold stillness settled on Mark Hayes' features. He was connecting the dots. The timeline. The special tea that Gary insisted on. The worsening symptoms. Gary Sinclair, Mark said, almost to himself. He runs the family foundation. He manages her finances. He looked at Emily. If you are right, you have saved her life. He looked at Susan. And if you are wrong, you have destroyed mine. Susan began to cry, silent tears running down her cheeks. Emily. Oh, Emily, what if you're wrong? What if it was just chamomile? Emily reached out with her good hand and took her mother's. Her hand was small and steady. It wasn't, Mom. I smelled it. Smelled it. Mark leaned forward. You smelled poison? Under the chamomile. My grandfather taught me that, too. He said most poisons have a partner. Something to hide the taste or the smell. He said chamomile is perfect for it. It's so strong, it covers the bitter taste. But he said foxglove, when it's dried, it has a faint smell. Like burnt almonds. Burnt almonds, Mark repeated. He looked ill. When Nurse Klein added the hot water, the smell was there. Just for a second. I knew I was right. They sat in silence again. This time, it was different. It was no longer the silence of suspicion. It was the silence of a shared, terrible dread. The door to the conference room opened. Dr. Carter stood there. He was pale. He was holding a single printout from the lab. Susan Vance stopped breathing. Mark Hayes stood up so fast his chair nearly fell over. Doctor. Mark's voice was a croak. Dr. Carter looked at Dr. Monroe, who had appeared behind him, drawn by the news. He looked at Susan. Then his eyes landed on Emily. She was right, Dr. Carter said, his voice shaking. The lab, they didn't find it at first. It was masked, just like she said. But when we ran the full botanical screen, the tea is contaminated. Heavily. It's not just foxglove. It's Digitalis lanata. Woolly foxglove. It's 10 times more potent. And it's mixed with something else. What? Mark demanded. A compound from an oleander plant. Another cardiac poison. They work together. They amplify each other. It's a sophisticated, toxic cocktail. It's designed to mimic gradual, untraceable heart failure. Dr. Monroe stepped into the room, his face the color of ash. He looked at the lab report. He looked at the 14-year-old girl in the maid's daughter's chair. Mark Hayes slumped against the wall, putting a hand over his mouth. He was not a man who cried, but his shoulders shook. He looked at Emily with eyes full of a terrible, profound gratitude. He was killing her, Mark whispered. My own cousin. He was murdering my mother. Susan Vance let out a sob, a sound of pure, unadulterated shock. Emily just closed her eyes, her good hand gripping her grandfather's book. Her other hand, wrapped in white bandages, throbbed. The signal had come, and she had been right. A bomb had gone off in the quiet, sterile hallway. The shrapnel was silence, and the shockwave was the truth. Dr. Monroe stood frozen, his face a sickly pale. He looked at the lab report in Dr. Carter's hand as if it were a snake. He, the chief of diagnostics, the man who had written textbooks, had been completely and humiliatingly wrong. Mark Hayes, however, was not a man who stayed in shock. His grief and fear instantly crystallized into action. The billionaire, the man who ran a global shipping empire, was back in charge. Dr. Carter, he snapped, his voice rough. Antidote. Now. What is it? Dr. Carter, jolted, looked up. It's Digitalis toxicity. The treatment is DG-Fab. It's an antibody. It binds to the poison. I'll call the pharmacy. We'll need a massive dose. We have to stop this. Go, Mark commanded. What about you, Dr. Monroe? What are you doing? Dr. Monroe flinched. He tried to draw himself up. I will supervise the administration. The protocol is. You will assist Dr. Carter, Mark cut him off. There was no mercy in his voice. He is in charge of my mother's care now. It was a total humiliation. Dr. Monroe's career, his entire reputation, evaporated in that single sentence. He nodded, his throat working, and turned to follow Dr. Carter, who was already sprinting toward the nurse's station. "Wait," a small voice said. Everyone stopped. They looked at Emily. She had her grandfather's book open on her lap. "It's not just the poison," Emily said, looking at Dr. Carter. Her voice was steady. "You have to treat what the poison did." Dr. Carter, to his credit, stopped and listened. "What do you mean?" "My grandfather wrote about this." She pointed to a line of her grandfather's sharp, clear handwriting. "He said these poisons, they work by tricking the body. They stop the heart from using potassium. He said the antidote stops the poison, but it doesn't fix the starvation. You have to give the heart its food back." Dr. Carter's eyes widened. "Of course. That's why her arrhythmia is so chaotic. Her potassium levels, they're not just low, they're blocked. The DG fab will bind the poison, but her heart muscle is depleted. It could fail from the shock." He looked at Emily with pure, unadulterated respect. "She's right. It's not just the antidote. We need a potassium drip. Immediately. To support the heart as it recovers." He ran, this time truly understanding the enemy he was fighting. Dr. Monroe followed, looking like a ghost. Now, Mark Hayes was alone in the conference room with Susan and Emily. The rage that had been simmering beneath his grief was rolling off him in visible waves. He was killing her, he said to himself. My mother. For money. For the foundation. Her will. It all goes to him if she's gone. He was connecting the dots. The loving nephew who managed all her finances. The helpful visits. He pulled his phone from his pocket. He didn't dial 911. He pressed a single button. "Frank," he said, his voice deadly calm. "I have a situation at Cedar Crest. I need you here. Now." He paused, listening. "And I need security. My security. Lock this building down. No one named Gary Sinclair leaves the premises. He was here this afternoon. If he's already left, find him. I want the city cameras. I want his car. I want him found. Use any resource you need. Do you understand?" He hung up without waiting for an answer. He looked at Susan and Emily. They were pale, witnesses to a power they had never seen. "You too," Mark said. "You can't leave. You are the only ones who saw it. You are material witnesses." "Sir, Mr. Hayes," Susan stammered, "we won't go anywhere. We will do anything you need." "You already have," Mark said. He looked at Emily, his gaze softening. "You saved her life. You, a 14-year-old girl with a book. And they? The best in the world. They were letting her die. I saw it," Emily whispered. "I could not say something." "You have your grandfather's courage," Mark said. "That is a rare thing." The door opened. It was Nurse Klein. She had finished mopping up the spill. She looked confused and frightened, trying to pretend the world had not just tilted on its axis. "Mr. Hayes," she said, her voice uncertain. The floor is clean. Is there anything?" Mark turned his head. His eyes were cold steel. "Nurse," he said. "Sir, you are to report to Dr. Carter. You will follow his orders to the letter. You will not speak to me. You will not speak to my mother. And you will not speak to this girl or her mother." He gestured to Emily and Susan. "Except with the utmost respect. Am I clear?" Nurse Klein's face crumpled. The accusation. The spilled tea. It was all true. It was true, she whispered. "It was," Mark said. The nurse's professional mask broke. She saw her career, her pension, her entire life flashing before her eyes. She had tried to have the hero fired. She had threatened a child who had just saved the hospital's most important patient. I apologize, Mr. Hayes. Ms. Vance. I didn't know. I was just following procedure." Susan, who had been a mouse for 8 years, who had lived in fear of this very woman, spoke up. Her voice was a bare whisper, but it was clear and sharp. "You threatened my daughter. You threatened my job. Because you didn't want to listen. You told her she was a maid's child. You told her she knew nothing." Nurse Klein flinched, the words hitting her like stones. I'm sorry, Nurse Klein," Mark said. "You are on probation. Effective immediately. One more complaint, one more unkind word to any member of the staff, cleaning or otherwise, and you are finished. Not just here. Everywhere. Do you understand?" "Yes, sir. Thank you, sir." She backed out of the room, her eyes wide with fear, and hurried away. Susan let out a long, shuddering breath. She had never spoken to an authority figure like that in her life. She felt dizzy. Mark Hayes turned back to Susan and Emily. The adrenaline was fading. He looked tired. Bone tired. "You can't stay in this room," he said. "Not like this. And you can't go back to that hallway." He gestured to the massive, polished, empty conference table. "Please," he said, "sit at the table. Both of you." This was not a request. It was not an order. It was a new arrangement. Susan looked at the chair. It was a chair for board members. For billionaires. She hesitated, then slowly, she sat down. Emily sat beside her, placing her bandaged hand on the cool, dark wood. They were no longer the help in the corner. They were at the table. "I have to go to her," Mark said. "I need to be there when they give her the antidote. When I know she's safe. Will you wait here? I need to talk to you both. After." "Of course, Mr. Hayes," Susan said, her voice stronger now. "We'll wait." Mark looked at Susan. "Ms. Vance." "Susan, thank you. Your daughter, she is remarkable. You must be very proud." Susan looked at Emily. The tears she had been holding back for hours, for years, finally came. They were tears of terror, of relief, and of a pride so deep it ached. "I am," Susan whispered, "more than you will ever know." Mark nodded, his face a complex mask of gratitude and fury. He turned and left the conference room. He strode down the hall to Suite 801, a man ready for war, and pushed the door open. Susan and Emily were left alone. The massive, luxurious room was completely silent. They were two small figures at a giant table. Emily's hand throbbed under the bandage. She was exhausted. She finally let her shoulders slump. "Emily," Susan said, her voice thick. You were amazing. You were just like him. You were just like Cap." "I was so scared, Mom," Emily admitted. "I know, sweetie. Me too." Susan slid out of her chair and moved to Emily's. She wrapped her arms around her daughter, pulling her close. "But you did it. You were brave, and you were right. You saved that woman's life." Emily leaned her head on her mother's shoulder, a 14-year-old girl who had just faced down doctors and nurses and billionaires. She closed her eyes. For the first time that day, she felt safe. Outside the conference room, the hospital was in quiet chaos. Dr. Carter and a team of nurses were inside Suite 801, and 4 bags of DG Fab was hanging. A second, smaller bag of potassium was dripping slowly into Mrs. Hayes's arm. Mark Hayes stood by the window, his back to the room, watching his mother's frail form on the bed. He did not move. Dr. Monroe stood in the doorway, watching. He was not allowed in. He was a ghost in his own hospital. In the lobby, 4 large men in dark suits stepped out of a private elevator. They spoke quietly to the head of hospital security. Within minutes, the building was locked. Gary Sinclair's face was on every security monitor. The wait began. Susan and Emily waited in the conference room. An hour passed. Then 2. The sun began to set. The light in the room turned from gold to gray. Susan must have dozed off. She woke with a start when the door opened. Mark Hayes stood in the doorway. He looked 10 years older than he had that morning, but the crushing weight on his shoulders was gone. "Mr. Hayes?" Susan stood up quickly. "She's stable," Mark said. His voice was thick with emotion. "The doctors. Dr. Carter. He said the change was almost immediate. Her heart rate is normalizing." She woke up. Susan put her hand to her heart. "Oh, thank God. She asked for me," Mark said, a small, stunned smile on his face. "She knew who I was. The yellow halos are gone." She said the lights looked white again. He walked into the room, not as a commander, but as a grateful son. "She is not out of the woods," he said. "It will be a long recovery. The toxins did a lot of damage. But she will live. Dr. Carter is sure of it. She will live." He stopped in front of the table. He looked at Emily. "The police are here," he said. "They are talking to Gary. My security team found him at his club. He was celebrating. He had a new will in his briefcase. One that left him everything." "Oh my," Susan breathed. "They will want to talk to you, Emily, to get your statement. You are the one who saw it all. Would that be all right?" Emily nodded. "Yes, sir. But that can wait," Mark said. He pulled out a chair and sat down at the table with them. He looked at Susan. "We need to discuss your future, Ms. Vance." Susan's stomach dropped. My future, sir? You can't work here anymore." Susan's face went white. "After everything. Sir, I understand. The disturbance. Nurse Klein." "Susan," Mark said, holding up a hand. You can't work here anymore as a maid. Your daughter just proved that the most valuable person in this hospital wasn't the chief of diagnostics. It was the woman who saw everything. And it was the girl who was smart enough to understand it. He looked at Emily. Emily, you have a gift. A rare one. Your grandfather taught you well. I suspect you know more than what's just in that book. Emily glanced at her mother. I like to read. Medical journals. Online. I thought so, Mark smiled. You should be in a special school. You should be in college. You should be running a lab, not sitting in a hospital hallway. He turned back to Susan. I am setting up a trust, an educational fund. It will pay for Emily's entire education. Any school she wants. Any university she chooses. Medical school, if that's what she wants. It is done. Susan just stared, her mouth open. She was speechless. And for you, Susan, Mark continued, I owe you a debt I can never repay. You have been through a terrible ordeal. You've been underpaid and overlooked for 8 years. That ends. I am going to make you a settlement. One that means you never have to mop another floor. One that means you can buy a house. You can watch your daughter graduate. He named a number. It was a number that made Susan Vance feel faint. It was more money than she had ever dreamed of. Sir? Mr. Hayes. I can't, Susan stammered. It's too much. It is not enough, Mark said, his voice firm. It is what you are owed. But I have one condition. One thing I want to ask of you. Both of you. Anything, Susan said. My mother. She is alive because of you. She is a lonely woman. Her family, as it turns out, was poison. His face darkened, but he pushed it away. When she is better, I would like it if you would visit her. As friends, not as staff. I think she would like you, Emily. I think she would like to meet the girl who saved her life. Emily looked up from her book. She gave a small, genuine smile. I'd like that too. 3 weeks later, the world was a different color. Susan Vance stood in the kitchen of their new apartment. It wasn't a palace. It was a simple, clean, 2-bedroom apartment in a good neighborhood, with a small balcony that overlooked a park. But to Susan, it was everything. Sunlight, not the cold, sterile light of the hospital, filled the room. She was unpacking a box labeled kitchen. She was wearing jeans and a simple red sweater. She had not worn her gray uniform in 21 days. She still woke up some mornings, her heart pounding, thinking she was late for her shift. Then she would remember. She would never be late for that shift again. In the living room, Emily sat at a new wooden desk. It was piled high with books. They were crisp and new. Advanced biology, organic chemistry, pharmacology. Mark Hayes's educational fund had not just enrolled her in the best private preparatory academy in the state. It had provided her with a college-level curriculum. She was absorbing it like a sponge. On a small shelf above the desk, in a place of honor, sat one old, leather-bound book. Its spine was worn, its pages soft. I still can't believe it, Susan said, placing a coffee mug in a cabinet. It doesn't feel real. This place. These clothes. Not having to hide. Emily looked up from her desk. It's real, Mom. You don't have to be afraid anymore. I know. Susan walked over and put a hand on her daughter's blonde hair. I'm so proud of you. What you did. I was so scared. But you were so brave. You were just like him. Emily reached up and put her bandaged hand over her mother's. The burn was healing, fading to a pale pink scar. A small, permanent reminder. He would have been proud of you, too, Mom, Emily said. You stood up to Nurse Klein. Susan laughed, a short, surprised sound. I did, didn't I? She looked at her hands. They were no longer raw from cleaning chemicals. It's funny. For 8 years, I tried to be invisible. I thought that was how we would be safe. But you saved us by refusing to be invisible. I couldn't let her die, Emily said, her voice quiet. I knew what I knew. Cap always said, knowing the truth doesn't mean anything, Em. It's acting on it that changes the world. A small, expensive-looking envelope sat on the desk. It was thick, cream-colored cardstock. We should get ready, Emily said, tapping the envelope. He's sending the car at 2. Susan's stomach fluttered. I'm nervous. Visiting. Like we're equals. We are, Emily said simply. The Blacktown car was silent as it drove. This time, Susan and Emily were not in the service entrance. They were driven to the grand front lobby of the Summit Wing. The automatic doors slid open. Mark Hayes was waiting for them, not in a rumpled, worried suit, but in a pressed, casual shirt, and slacks. The grief was gone. He was smiling. Susan. Emily. Thank you for coming. Mr. Hayes, Susan said, nodding. It's Mark. Please. After what you've done. Mr. Hayes is for the people I'm about to fire. He said it with a small, sharp edge of humor. They rode the private elevator up. The hallway was just as Emily remembered it. Cold, marble, and silent. But today, it held no fear. Mark led them to Suite 801. He knocked softly before pushing the door open. Mom? You have visitors. The room was bright. The heavy curtains were drawn back. The scent of poison was long gone. It smelled like flowers. In a large, comfortable armchair by the window, an old woman was sitting up. She was thin, her skin like pale parchment. But her eyes, a sharp, intelligent blue, were very much alive. This was Eleanor Hayes. She was frail, but she was not weak. So, Eleanor said, her voice surprisingly strong. You're the ones. Mark smiled. Mom, this is Susan Vance. And this is Emily. Eleanor Hayes looked at Susan first. You are a good mother. You have raised a lion. Susan flushed. Thank you, ma'am. I'm just so glad to see you looking well. I feel like I've been hit by a truck, Eleanor said bluntly. But I'm alive, which is more than I could say a month ago. Her gaze shifted to Emily, who was standing quietly, her hands clasped. Come here, child, Eleanor ordered gently. Emily stepped forward. Eleanor studied her face. The pale blonde hair, the steady eyes. Mark told me all about you. He said you were 14. He was wrong. You're older than that, aren't you? Emily didn't know what to say. I guess so, ma'am. He told me about your grandfather. Cap. Eleanor's expression softened. A medic in the war. A man who looked at the things no one else would. We grew up in an age, child, when people like that were called heroes. Now they're called, well, it doesn't matter. He taught you well. Eleanor held out a thin, veined hand. Emily gently took it. You have a gift, Emily Vance, the old woman said, her grip surprisingly firm. You see the patterns. You see the truth underneath the noise. People like my former doctor, Dr. Monroe, they are educated, but they are not wise. They look for what they expect to find. You look for what is there. I just read his book, Emily whispered. No, Eleanor said, shaking her head. 100 people could read that book and see nothing but scribbles about plants. You saw a life. My life. She patted Emily's hand. Mark tells me you're starting at the academy. That you're studying toxicology. Yes, ma'am. Good. Don't ever let them teach it out of you. Don't ever let them tell you that your way of seeing is wrong. The world is run by men who love to shout. It is saved by people who know how to listen. Susan and Mark stood by the door, watching. Two parents, from two ends of the world. They were united by the small, quiet girl who was now holding the hand of the billionaire's mother. Thank you, Eleanor said, her blue eyes locking with Emily's. For my life. You're welcome, Mrs. Hayes, Emily said. 6 months later, a university lecture hall. The room was oak-paneled, old and respected. It smelled of floor polish and old paper. This was not the academy. This was a special guest seminar at the university's medical school. Emily, now 15, sat in the front row. She was the youngest person in the room by a decade. The other seats were filled with medical students and postgraduates, all of them looking serious, all of them taking notes on laptops. Emily took notes in a simple spiral notebook. Her handwriting was as clear and sharp as her grandfather's. At the front, a distinguished professor, a woman with kind eyes, pointed to a complex diagram on the screen. And so, the professor said, we have a classic diagnostic puzzle. A patient presents with chaotic arrhythmia and systemic failure. All standard toxicity panels come back negative. The patient is declining. You are the doctor. What do you miss? The room was silent. The med students looked at their screens, at their notes. They were searching for the textbook answer. Anyone? The professor asked. A hand went up. A small hand, the back of it marked by a faint pink scar. The professor's eyes lit up. She had been waiting for this. Yes, Ms. Vance. Emily stood up. The room felt large, but she was not afraid. She was not a maid's daughter in a hallway. She was not invisible. She was a guest of honor. She looked at the chart. She saw the patterns. You're not missing a what, Emily said, her voice clear and carrying in the quiet hall. You're missing a how. You're running a panel for a single refined toxin. She pointed to the screen. But the symptoms, they aren't singular. They're cumulative. They're synergistic. You're not looking for a pill. You should be looking for a plant. The entire room turned to look at her. The professor smiled. Emily took a breath, the quiet confidence of her grandfather, of her mother, of Eleanor Hayes, and of her own hard-won knowledge settling over her. She was here. She was seen. She was heard. And she was just getting started. And that's where we'll pause the story for now. I hope it gave you a chance to step back from the day and simply breathe for a while. Maybe you were listening with a cup of tea, sitting by the window, or settling in for a calm evening. Tell me about it in the comments. I love hearing where these stories find you. And if you'd like to keep joining me for the next one, liking and subscribing really helps. Thank you for spending this time with me.